Hi, I'm Alan Rose. Welcome to WordFest. Tonight we are going down to Ashland, Oregon, and then up to White Salmon, hopping around the Northwest for two mystery writers. Let's begin with Ashland. So tonight we are talking with Kate Dyer-Seeley from Ashland. Kate, good afternoon.
Thanks so much for having me. It's so great to see you again, Alan.
Yeah, it's great. It's been a number of years since we've had you on WordFest. Last time you actually came up to Longview, and because of the miracle of Zoom, we are able to talk with you down there in Ashland. Kate, you are nothing if not prolific. You have written a number of cozy mysteries. To date, you've got 26 books out there. I have one book out there. You humble me. But tonight we're going to talk about your two latest books. You also write under the pen name of Ellie Alexander. So can I talk to Ellie now, please?
Yeah, okay, let me just I need a different hairstyle. Ellie's in the house.
Okay, hey, hi Ellie, it's nice to have you with us.
Hi, Alan, start writing more books. What are you doing?
So Ellie, you have 13 books now in your Bake Shop mystery series, which is based in Ashland. And first off, let's just talk about the genre of cozy mysteries. And you are, like I said, tremendously prolific. You have a very loyal readership. How's it been during the pandemic with your books and your cozies?
Right. Well, and this is the caveat that I like to throw out for you in particular. I mean, I think obviously if you're reading a book like the latest release in my series, Chilled to the Cone, you know that you're not reading War and Peace. And your one book was really like a soul opener. So it's a different style of writing, right? You know when you're reading a cozy that it's going to be light, it's going to be an escape. I think they really resonate because they are just a little bit of like mind candy, a brain break for readers. I really try to weave depth in, of course, but at the end of the day, there's always going to be a body, and someone like a pastry chef is going to hop onto the scene of the crime and swoop in and save the day. But I think with the pandemic, there's really been a discovery of new readers who have formed an attachment to this genre. And it's so fun for me because when I set out to start writing, I like you, began my writing path in a much different vein. My first book was a memoir about losing my mom to young onset Alzheimer's, and it was really a lot of pouring my own grief and emotion onto the page. And so when I segued into writing mysteries, I told myself, in fact, on my whiteboard, I wrote my own mantra that was like, I want to spread joy into the world in the form of murder. So I feel like I'm succeeding in that.
Very good. I think it's only fair to point out that, as I recall you telling me that when you moved to Ashland, the scene of so many murders with your books, that the city council was glad to have you there, but they pointed out there had been like only one murder in the last decade or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. They definitely have like a disclaimer, like, we're so glad you're here. And also like, no, Ashland is very safe. Yeah.
Great, great. Well, you brought out a book in December in the Bake Shop series, and you are bringing out another one in June. Why don't you tell us about the December book first?
Sure. So that book is titled Chilled to the Cone. And in this series, Juliet, who is my protagonist, she is very romantic at heart, of course, because her name is Juliet. And for anyone who's unfamiliar with Ashland, we are home of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. So there is really this beautiful theatrical layer that I get to add into the series that might not work somewhere else, because it is not an anomaly to be walking. In fact, just yesterday, I was walking in the plaza. I did a whole walk up through Lithia Park. I came back to grab a coffee, and there was a whole group of people doing like marionette puppets just in full costume at like 10 o'clock in the morning. So I get to add those touches in. But up until this point in time, Juliet has been very busy. She's running a bake shop tort, and she's solving crimes, of course. She's opened a vineyard with some friends, and she needed something else to do because clearly she wasn't busy enough. So in this book, I have her opening a pop-up ice cream shop in the Railroad District. And this book is a little bit less cozy, I would say, in a lot of ways, because it really does address some real issues that not just Ashland has, but all of the West Coast in terms of the unhoused and kind of migratory populations. And Ashland's really unique in that there's unfortunately a housing crisis, and we had a major wildfire last year. And I wrote this book prior to any of that happening. And then this whole theme resonates all the way through the book. So it's been surreal to kind of see how sometimes your creative energies parallel real life.
Right. Can you read a section from your December book?
Okay, this is from Chilled to the Cone. They say that every journey starts with a single step. As of late, I felt like my steps were taking me in opposing directions. Fortunately, our little corner of Southern Oregon wasn't too large. Ashland is nestled in the Siskiyou Mountains, just north of California, giving us long, glorious stretches of sun, stunning vistas, and an abundance of fresh pine-scented air. Not only are we tucked between the deciduous forests and gently rolling golden hills, but we're also home to the world-renowned Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Throughout the year, tourists come from near and far to take in a production of The Tempest in the Elizabethan beneath a ceiling of stars, or experience an intimate performance of new works by innovative playwrights in one of the many theaters on the OSF campus. When I had returned to my childhood home a while ago, I hadn't been sure what to expect. I had thought my stop might be temporary, but Ashland captured me under her spell. I knew now that this is where I was meant to be. It was an exciting time to have a renewed appreciation for the place where I had grown up. Maybe that was the gift of leaving. Distance and time away from my beloved hometown had made me want to embrace and experience all that the Rogue Valley had to offer.
Juliet was a baker on a cruise line. Was that correct?
Well done, yeah.
And then she comes back home to her hometown.
Yep, exactly.
How did you decide upon a baker as your amateur sleuth?
Right. You know, for me, baking is such a love language. I remember like all of my formative memories of my early childhood are in our family kitchen. My dad was an English teacher and he's a Shakespeare buff. So at a very young age, he would have me quoting sonnets and soliloquies, which I did not appreciate as a young child. And now I do, thank you, Dad. And then my mom was a mystery reader. So she read lots of Dorothy Sayers and P.D. James and Agatha Christie. And their baking styles were kind of like their reading styles. My dad to this day will spend hours crafting an 8-layer chocolate almond buttercream torte and hand piping it and making his own apricot preserves. And my mom was like a Betty Crocker baker. Everything tasted great, but like slap on the more frosting, the better. And her cakes were always kind of lopsided and crooked. And so that really spoke to me. And I think there's something so sensory and scientific about baking. I often, when I'm writing, get so sucked into that process that I have to stop and remind myself, no, we need a body, we need a lot of peril for Juliet to be in. But I really do think it's like a love language, and I hope that comes through. I love the food writing.
Great, great. So then in June, you're bringing out yet another volume in the
Yes.
series. Tell us about that.
So that book is titled, wait for it. Here we go. I just got the cover. Mocha She Wrote. A little homage to Jessica Fletcher with Murder She Wrote. And in this book, Andy, who is Tort's star barista, and he has been a character since book 1 in the series, he's going to be competing in a regional barista challenge. And that came about because, well, you know, being in the Pacific Northwest, coffee is a culture in and of itself. And if you go into a coffee shop and you don't know how to order the right coffee or the right way, like, you might get murdered depending on who the barista is behind the counter. Like, our baristas take coffee very seriously. And so a few years ago, a good friend who's a coffee roaster in Portland, they were hosting a round of these barista competitions, and I was absolutely blown away. Baristas have like 2 minutes to make a single origin coffee, and then it's almost like a sommelier where they can close their eyes and tell you where the beans came from and how they were processed. And so that's really, this book is very coffee centric.
Very good. And so we'll be looking forward to that come June. Would you like to read a portion from that book?
Sure. Yeah. I printed out a little early taste. Let me get to it. I like to start every book. Every book in the series has started with the same 3 words. They say that. So since we just heard the opening of Chilled to the Cone, I'm going to read you the same opening for Mocha She Wrote. Okay. They say that love is the answer. After years of searching for answers about my future and where I was meant to be, I was inclined to believe that statement. My world had expanded dramatically since my husband Carlos had arrived in Ashland. Ooh, that's a spoiler. Following a 2-year separation, we had finally reconciled, and there wasn't a day that I woke up without feeling giddy. It was almost too good to be true. The pessimist in me worried that something was going to go terribly wrong. All of my dreams had come to fruition. Carlos was in Ashland and managing our growing boutique winery. Things at our family bake shop Tort were running seamlessly, and we had recently opened a seasonal walk-up ice cream shop, Scoops, where we served luscious hand-churned concretes made with fresh local berries and drizzled with dark chocolate and dulce de leche. As if that wasn't enough to keep me occupied, Carlos and I were settling into my childhood home, making it our own by installing an outdoor oven and hummingbird feeders in the backyard, and hanging collections of photos from our travels together across the globe. What more could I want? I asked myself as I turned onto the plaza. A lazy spring had given way to a busy summer. It was nearing the end of June, which meant that Ashland's idyllic downtown was bursting with activities. Tourists had arrived to take in shows, kids lounged in Lithia Park, soaking up the warm sun and a well-deserved break from their studies. Adventure lovers waited in line at the outdoor store to take advantage of the region's abundant opportunities, from rafting down the Rogue River to hiking Grizzly Peak. The eager buzz of activity brought a smile to my face as I walked into Tort. The bake shop sat at the corner of the plaza across from Lithia Bubblers, offering my team and our loyal customers a perfect view of all the action. Our bright red and teal awnings, outdoor tables, and windows displays were complete with strings of rainbow bunting, papier-mâché popsicles, and colorful beach balls. A symphony of delectable flavors greeted me as I stepped inside. Andy slung shots of espresso behind the coffee counter. We had positioned our state-of-the-art shiny fire engine red Italian espresso machine next to the exposed brick wall so that our baristas could chat with customers while grinding beans and frothing milk. Then we get into a lot of coffee and some murder.
Great, great. So I want to now talk to Kate. Can we do that?
Yes, absolutely. I know. It is like living in two heads. I am a Gemini, so I feel like I was destined to have two personalities.
Great, okay. So Kate, tell us about the Pacific Northwest series. How has that been going, and do you have some books coming out in that series?
Yes, so that series is set in our beloved Portland, and it features a very young journalist, Meg Reed, who is fresh out of college, and she thinks she's going to win a Pulitzer and become an investigative journalist, but she can't get a job because newspapers are shrinking, as we well know. That's been true. And so she bills herself as an intrepid adventurer in order to land a gig writing for Northwest Extreme magazine. But in reality, she has not an athletic bone in her body, and her idea of adventure is sipping a latte on the couch. So that book, that series has thus far 5 books in the series. And when I started, there was a subplot that was running through the series that was kind of a secondary murder, which in book 5 gets wrapped up. And when I finished, that just felt like a really sort of natural closing point for that series. And I had already started writing The Bake Shop and some of my Ellie titles. But for like the last year or so, and I should also say, not a week goes by when I don't get an email from a reader saying, "What about Meg? Bring Meg back. Where's Meg?" And I haven't had headspace for it. But within the last year, I have suddenly felt her tapping in my head. So I have just within the last month started sketching out an idea for book 6. But what I think is going to happen is she's going to come back in maybe 10 years later, and it's not going to be a mystery. I'm going to take all of that cast and I'm going to bring her back in maybe more like rom-com form.
So Kate, in addition to your cozy mysteries, you are now working on a non-cozy women's fiction novel. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm not going to stop writing mysteries. I'm loving, I think the gift of writing long running series is that every time I sit down to write a new book, it feels like coming home and those characters feel so familiar to me. But this last year, like all of us, I've had more time on my hands. I haven't traveled, before I was traveling so much. And there was something kind of cathartic in some ways, I think, about just kind of closing ourselves in and our little family unit here. And that really has cracked me open to new creative ideas. And I also feel like because I've written so many mysteries, I need, as a writer, to challenge myself. So I've started 2 different projects this year, both of which are still in draft form. But it's been really eye-opening, I think, to go back to do something that is not in my comfort zone, that doesn't necessarily come as easily as the mystery writing does for me anymore, and has really made me like push myself out into new territory. So I'm really excited about it, and I'm going to be interested to see how that kind of bleeds in and informs my mystery writing going forward.
Right, right. Do you find a different writing process from writing your cozies to these other projects now?
Yeah, definitely. Because, so much of mystery writing is driving the plot forward. When you're writing a mystery, there is some level of formula involved. And, some writers scoff at that. I think you find your own voice and your creative energy within that formula. That's what I've done. But these 2 new projects are not that at all. So it really has been really like having to make myself feel uncomfortable and take myself back to that early stage when I wrote my first mystery and I had no idea what I was doing. And I've shifted into teaching mystery writing a lot now, and coaching some new writers. And so I think it's really been a gift for me to remember, like, oh no, when we start like putting a pinky toe somewhere else, it kind of forces you to rethink what you know, which is good.
I think it's great. I admire you, Kate, not only for how productive and prolific you are, but for stretching yourself creatively into a new area, and having to rediscover um, writing in a new format. So congratulations, and we look forward to hearing from you more. And also, we'll probably be back in touch with you when your next books come out later in this year.
And maybe at some point I can make the trek to Longview and be in person.
Would love to have that. Love to have that. Well, thank you so much. We'll see you again soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Now we're shifting over to white salmon, where we'll be talking with Rick George. Good afternoon, Rick.
Howdy.
Hey, nice to have you with us again. Rick, you, in addition to the poetry that you shared with us last month regarding the old days of logging, you have written a couple of mysteries. And tonight we want to focus on uh, one of the more recent ones, the Cooper's Loot. And the Cooper in the title is the famous, infamous folk hero, anti-hero, D.B. Cooper. How did you latch on to Cooper as the subject for your mystery?
Well, you can't live in the Pacific Northwest and not know about D.B. Cooper. And in fact, we're getting very close to the 50th anniversary of his hijacking. And for those of who are watching, 50 years ago, this Thanksgiving break from this year, a man who came to be known as D.B. Cooper, not really his real name, dress shirt, tie, impeccable manners, shows a waitress, I'm sorry, a flight attendant on a flight from Portland to Seattle what it appears to be a bomb. And he insists that they land. He asks for $200,000 to be delivered to him, which is like $1 million in today's dollars, and an assortment of parachutes. Lets all the passengers off, clears the whole passenger compartment, has some flight attendants and the pilots stay on the plane, tells them exactly the angle that he wants the flaps at, exactly the height that he wants them to fly, tells them to go to Mexico. They say, well, we're going to have to stop Marino to refuel. He said, that's fine. And so they take off from Seattle, and when they land in Reno, he's not there. And what he had done is he knew enough about these planes to open up the aft door and jump out with a parachute, and nobody ever heard from him again. It's a fascinating story, and it's as you said, an anti-hero type of individual, always makes for some fun literature.
Right, right. So tell us about the Cooper's Loot. How do you take the folk legend of D.B. Cooper and spin it into a mystery?
Yeah, so 1 year later, we start with a young woman named Beverly Wachowski. She's a reporter for a Portland area newspaper, and she's frustrated because it being 1972, they've assigned her the women's page, and she wants to tackle something a little more, in her view, meaty than that. And so she ends up wandering into a bar outside of Kelso with an agenda. And it will ultimately lead to this D.B. Cooper mystery.
Okay, okay. Um, Do you want to read a section to sort of get us into the story of D.B. Cooper, of Cooper's Loot?
Happy to do so. I got to open it up again. Yes, I'm going to start at the beginning of the story because this is where Beverly Wachowski ends up at the place called the Spar Pole Saloon on the outskirts of Kelso. And you will get to see a little bit of what her agenda is when she stumbles onto the potential of a big story. Chapter 1. On a drizzly November night in 1972, Bev Wachowski drove her VW Beetle onto a gravel lot where beer here in frosty blue letters blinked like a beacon. Although she didn't want any beer or any other drink, she parked near the entrance and peered at the Spar Pole Saloon, so weathered it looked like it had been built shortly after Lewis and Clark paddled by on the Columbia River. Brown planks pocked with paint blisters and spots of bare wood glistened beneath the buzzing neon sign. Rain dribbled off the roof over the entry. From nearby pulp mills, an odor like asparagus climbed into her car. She picked up her yellow notepad and squinted through 4 pages of notes from her interview with June Harrison, a Kelso High School basketball player who'd scored 43 points 2 nights ago. After flipping to a blank page, she hung a Pentax 35mm camera on a strap around her neck and stepped out of the car into an ankle-deep puddle. Cold water sloshed over the top of her black platform shoe and drenched her sock. She hopped backward. The puddle spread in front of her like a small pond, and she giant stepped to the far side. It was only 12 feet from her VW to the Spar Pole's boot-scuffed white door, but if it kept raining, she'd have to snorkel to get back to her car. She looked again at the notepad, already damp. Did she really need it? Would it get in the way of what she wanted to do? She leaned forward, tossed the notepad back inside, and hid the camera under the front seat. She closed the door, almost losing her grip and falling face first into the water. Inside the Spar Pole, a tinge of whiskey wafted through fumes of beer and cigarettes. The only man sitting at a bar that stretched left to right made no effort to assess who'd walked in as Waylon Jennings sang on the jukebox. Opposite the bar, a 30-something cocktail waitress with slightly Asian features and shaggy brown hair raised an eyebrow at Bev before lifting a tray of beers and walking out to the right side of the room. She stopped at a cluster of people leaning toward someone in a chair with his back to the wall. Out the left side of the bar, in an adjoining room, 2 pool tables stood, one empty and the other abandoned with 8 balls missing. Bev tapped a finger against the side of her skirt. If she was going to finagle the quote she wanted for her story, the man at the bar was her only option. She could park next to him, bat her eyes, show a little leg. Hey, mister, you heard what June Harrison did, right? What do you think, a girl scoring like that, bumping and sweating and breathing hard like she was a boy? She'd get her lascivious quote. Instead of a news article, she'd write a little commentary in her weekly column. Her readers would understand exactly what she was saying. Or she could drop her whole idiotic idea and write the story straight up, and it would be fine. What a girl, this June Harrison, 43 points in a game. Wow. Over at the group, the waitress had squeezed next to a middle-aged man wearing a black cowboy hat with a gold band. Someone in the huddle shifted, opening a gap through which Bev could see the speaker, a man with dark hair hanging to his shoulders and a black beard thick with corkscrew curls that obscured most of his face and drooped to his chest. He noticed her through the same gap and nodded while continuing to talk. At the same moment, Wayland's hollered lamentations ended in a fade out, revealing the speaker's voice, low-pitched, calm, like a captain addressing his crew. The waitress must have noticed the man's nod because she turned from the group and locked her eyes onto Bev, and before Bev could escape, she called out to her, "Pardon me, honey." She strode toward Bev. "I just got hooked into what that man was saying." Bev tapped her leg again. "Who is he?" The waitress came closer, glanced at the man at the bar, and lowered her voice. "He says he knows D.B. Cooper." Bev's whole body lit up like the "Beer Here" neon sign, and just as quickly faded dark. Yeah, sure, Cooper's buddy, along with 1,000 other crackpots. "I never seen him before, but he seems to know a lot about the..." The waitress stopped herself, pressed her lips together. "The hijacking?" offered Bev. "Yeah, and more than that." Bev suppressed a guffaw. The waitress seemed so earnest, so gullible. And yet, what if... And I'll stop there.
Okay. Okay, great. So in this mystery, you've sort of resurrected the legend of D.B. Cooper, and you fashioned a mystery around the missing loot. Um, w- what were what was the influences or inspirations for your story besides Cooper?
Oh, okay. Well, I did want to do some parallels with Agatha Christie's, and then there were none. And also an old Humphrey Bogart movie directed by John Huston, The Treasure of Sierra Madre. In each of those films, a group of strangers come together on a quest, and they vow to be, stick together through thick and thin, and things go wrong. And so there's a little bit of a parallel with this story and those.
Okay, great, great. Do you want to get further into the story? Share that with the readers?
Well, I would like to. I think what I'll do is let you know. Obviously, they're in a bar. There's this guy that says he knows D.B. Cooper, and why is he in this bar? Why is he talking to people about this? It turns out it involves that buried treasure. The way I play the whole D.B. Cooper part out is that Cooper, in order to keep the heat off of himself, and didn't want to get caught walking out of the woods with 200 grand in a pack, he buried it and marked it, marked some trees so that he could send someone to get it again, to keep himself unexposed in the following year, and ran into a little problem. A whole bunch of the area where he had hiked in and buried that loot was clear cut. Uh-oh, so there go the trees with all the marks, and except for the ones on the other side of the clear cut, and that could be anywhere along a long line. So this guy that's in the bar, Andy O'Brien, he's looking for like a little search crew, and he's going to offer them a little bit of money if they'll help him find the loot, where the trees, find a tree with the mark so they can get the resumption of the trail. So here we are, we're parallel to those other two stories, Agatha Christie's and Treasure of Sierra Madre, except it's 1972, and this is all taking place in the backdrop of America in turmoil. Bev Wachowski happens to be a Vietnam War widow with a small child. The people who end up joining her in the group are boyfriend, girlfriend, college students, counterculture type. We also get a woodsman in the group. We get a fast talking business tycoon type down home person, a sweet cocktail waitress, and they are all in on it together except Bev does not tell them that she's a reporter. And so that's the setting the stage.
Okay. Go ahead.
Well, if I were to get to a place that another place to read, the reader will get an idea of what complications might be coming. On the first day, they 2 days, a couple of mornings later, the day after Thanksgiving, they meet in Kelso in the wee hours of the morning and head on out to the site. And that takes them up a really rugged logging road until they can't go any further. They have to hike. Bev sprains her ankle. They spend the day looking without success for the tree, any tree with that mark that they're supposed to find. And so they have to spend the night. They're prepared for it. A little bit of camaraderie around a bonfire. Well, maybe we'll get a little hint here that things aren't going to go well. Shall I read?
Please.
Great. At the far upper end of the clear cut, a big bonfire illuminated 6 tents whose rainbow of colors contrasted the night muted browns and green around them. Seated on an unburned stump left over from the timber harvest, Bev accepted the bottle of single malt Dalmore whiskey and held it at eye level. Flames undulated through the brown glass. 4 previous swigs had burned with exquisite purity, and the heat had flowed like a lullaby down her leg to her ankle. A few more pulls would make her amenable to surgery on the spot. Don't have whiskey like this at the spar pole, slurred Tanya, seated on a log next to Andy, her gloved hand resting on his knee. Mighty nice of you to bring it, Theodore. The hell's a spar pole anyway? Asked Bev, holding onto the bottle. Or did someone leave an E off the word spare? No, it ain't a spare pole, said Jim, though I suppose you could call it that. You want to tell him, Ted? Spare pole? Hell, I got a spare pole. Any of you ladies want to borrow it? But you go ahead, Slim Jim. No, you tell him. You're the logging tycoon. Ted drew from a pipe and blew a ring of tobacco smoke. Just 'cause I own the land, it don't mean I know the intricacies of it. You're the one that's in there knocking down the trees. I'm just a choker is all. Never mind. Bev took a shot and handed the half-empty bottle to Jim. It's a logging thing, said Jim, holding the bottle on his thigh. Cut a tree part way up and it's a spar pole. Run some cables off it and that's how you haul in the logs. Sounds complicated, said Bev. Well, it is, sort of. You got to limit and top it and rig it 100 feet high, maybe 150 feet. There's all kinds of ways you can fuck it up. You don't choke it right, the log could fall right on top of you. My dad knew someone who biffed it that way. He took a swig and passed the bottle to Susan. Those boys are working rain or snow, said Tanya. You don't work, you don't eat, said Jim. Owner ain't gonna pay if you're not out there. Ted turned so that his backside faced the fire. I like your mettle, son. You put your time in, maybe I'll put you up for a supervisor. Got a long ways to go before I can get to that. Something moist tickled Bev's nose. She slid a fingertip down the bridge and licked the wetness. Was it starting to rain? She looked up, a booze-fueled pinwheel whirling in her head. A few fire-lit flakes parachuted from the black night. If she stood, she'd totter. She might fall into the fire, which would be consistent with the rest of her day. Another tap left a spot of moisture on the back of her hand. Anyone besides me notice it's snowing? She asked. Yes, you could call it that, said Jim. Andy looked behind them. It's not even a dusting. Little dots of white on the ground. Might even be a little warmer than when we arrived. Storms will do that. We ought to get to bed, said Tanya. It's only 7 o'clock, said Will. He handed the bottle back to Susan. I don't need this shit. Look what I got. He reached inside his coat, then held aloft a doobie and kissed it. I didn't get 2 hours sleep, Tanya continued. Thought I might snooze in the van, but not with the crowing and squawking and all the potholes and curves. She leaned her head onto Andy's arm. I want to go to bed. Ted looked sideways at the waitress. I got a vacancy in my tent. You got a vacancy in your brain, returned Tanya. Leave me alone, you old fart. You ain't exactly a spring chicken. Bed blew another O. Besides, I was only kidding. No, you weren't. You don't know how to talk to a girl. You probably got to pay for it every time. You really ought to leave her alone, said Bev. She took the joint from Jim and held the smoke in her lungs as long as she could. I know it. Guess the joke's wearing kind of thin. Been a while since I've been with a woman. I wonder why, said Susan. You're not turning on me now too, are you? We got other places we can go besides Acapulco. I'm about to turn on you, said Will. Nah, I'll stop. And we'll call it good there.
Okay.
Little hint of snow. It might start snowing more heavily than that.
So how long did it take from getting the idea for the story to having written the book?
About a year. And that's several drafts. I'm fortunate to be with a really good critique group. And it's kind of funny because some books take years to write, multiple drafts, multiple visions. This one just hummed right along. And it didn't,
Yeah. I know people are interested, being writers themselves, as to how did you get it published? What was the story behind that?
Well, I went to the Pacific Northwest Writers Association conference in SeaTac and pitched it to some agents and pitched it to an editor for the Wild Rose Press. Had interest from a lot of people. The editor from Wild Rose Press asked for a manuscript and pretty quickly offered publication. And in fact, I had another book that was getting published in May of 2019, and they wanted to publish it right then too, and they were going to be too close together, which was kind of a fun problem to have. I had to ask the publisher to don't publish it so fast. So, but that's how it ended up happening.
Congratulations, Rick. Well, certainly you've taken, I guess we can't really call it an urban legend with the Pacific Northwest, but you certainly found a legend that is known worldwide and spun an interesting mystery about it. Well, we wish you the best of luck with that, Rick. And when you're ready to launch your next book, come back to us. We'd love to hear about it and hear you read from it.
Well, thank you. I just love WordFest. And it's really fun for me that when I wrote Cooper's Loot and set it in Kelso, I didn't even know about WordFest. And now here it's kind of coming full circle. I'm in Kelso, Longview, and the surrounding region, sharing a book that is largely set in that area or takes off from that area anyway. So fun stuff.
Great, great. Well, thank you, Rick. Take care. We'll see you again.
All right.
Bye.
Hasta later.
Our thanks to Rick George and Kate Dyer-Seeley, Ellie Alexander, for being with us tonight. Hope to see you next month at WordFest.